In this video, I'm going to show you how to sew a super easy paneled skirt. For this project, you're going to need scissors, pins, thread, measuring tape, fabric, I use something with non-stretch, paper, ruler, and a pen for making the pattern, and a close-ended zipper. So we're going to start by measuring out our waist, and we're going to measure this exactly where we want the skirt to hit. I'm going to make mine low waist. Next, we want to measure out the length that we want for this skirt. Now we're going to plug it all into an equation to figure out the pattern. Using my waist measurement, this gives me a radius of 48 centimeters. So the radius is going to be the measurement from the corner of the fabric, and then we're going to measure out the length from that radius measurement. Because we're making a paneled skirt, we're going to divide this into 6 pieces. We're going to do a little more math to figure out the dimensions of these pieces. We need to divide our waist measurement, which in my case is 77 by 6, and that gives me 12.8. And that 12.8 measurement is what we're going to measure on the radius to determine the measurement of our pieces. And then we just need to add seam allowance. Okay, so we're going to start by measuring the radius measurement from the corner of the fabric and mark it out with pins. Then using our waist divided by 6 measurement, we're going to measure that along the line of the radius. And then measure out the length from that line. Then we're going to mark out the placement of these pins on our paper. Connect the pins, add our seam allowance, and turn this into our pattern. When creating a pattern, it's important to write as many details on this piece of paper as you think you might need. Things like seam allowance, how many times you're cutting this piece out, what direction you're cutting the piece, and the name of the piece. And now we can cut out our pattern. And we are cutting all 6 of these pieces out on the bias. This will just give a little more movement to our skirt. Now I have all 6 of my pieces and I'm going to sew those together, leaving one side open. I'm going to use a French seam, but you can use a regular seam as well. So for the French seam, I'm sewing wrong sides together and then I'm going to trim away the extra fabric on the seam allowance. And then moving to my iron, I'm going to iron open that seam, fold it over, and then iron it again, now with the wrong sides facing out. And then I'm going to do my second stitch on the wrong side of the fabric, right sides together, locking in all of those raw edges. So with all of my seams now sewn, except for the one side I left open, I'm going to pin it to mark out the placement of the zipper. I'm pinning wrong sides together because I'm doing a French seam, but you're going to pin right sides together if you're just doing a normal seam. So here we're just pinning the side seam, and then we're going to open up from the top enough that we're able to take the skirt on and off, and that's how we're going to determine the length of the zipper. And then we can sew up to where we pinned. And I'm doing the same steps of the French seam, trimming away the seam allowance, ironing the seam, and then doing my second stitch. And I'm only sewing up to the opening that we're leaving for the zipper. When inserting zippers, I like to sew the seam closed with the biggest stitch on my machine so it'll be easy to remove later, but it helps keep the fabric in place when I'm sewing in my zipper. So I'm going to sew up that seam, and then because I did a French seam, I have to do a slight little notch at the bottom. Then I can pin the right side of my zipper into the wrong side of my fabric. And then using my zipper foot, sew along where I pinned, attaching the zipper to the seam allowance. And then I can remove that stitch that was closing the side seam, and I can do a second stitch on my zipper to get it a little closer to the fabric. In my case, my zipper is a little longer, so I'm going to place pins at the top of the skirt, making sure that the zipper head cannot go above these pins, and then I'm going to trim away the top of the zipper. Again, being very careful that I'm not going to lose my zipper head, because once it's off the tracks, it's pretty impossible to get back on. So now we're going to add a bias strip that I cut out of the same fabric onto the top of our skirt. And the strip is about 5 centimeters in width, and we're going to attach it right sides together, tucking over 1 centimeter on the edge. And we're going to sew this piece all along the top of our skirt, and at the other end of the zipper, tucking that fabric over again by 1 centimeter, and just trimming away the excess. I decided to drop my waist by about 5 centimeters, and I wanted to show you this because I want you to know that throughout a project, you're almost always able to still make alterations. And then I'm going to trim away that excess fabric. I also did this bias strip technique that I'm doing on the top of the skirt on the sides of my zipper to give it a cleaner finish. Now we're going to iron that bias strip that we just sewed along the seam, And then we're going to fold over the top of the bias strip by 1 centimeter along the whole edge of the strip, and then we're going to fold it over again. Then we're going to place pins in the seam on the right side of the fabric, catching the fabric on the other side. And then we're going to sew along where we pinned. As you can see, the pins are placed in the seam and are catching the fabric on the other side. The final step is just to hem the skirt, where we're going to fold over the fabric once, iron it down, and then fold it over a second time. And then we're going to sew along the whole hem of the skirt. And you're all done! Thank you so much for watching, and if you liked this video, please subscribe.